Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of Micadelic. I am your host, Mike Brancatelli. Of course, it is me, it is I, it is the one and only. And we got a good episode for you today. I am not going to do a big kind of ranty open like I usually do because it's a good episode and I don't really have anything to say. I just released like a 2 hour and 36-minute podcast of just me. So if you want to hear me ranting and raving and explaining and talking and getting personal, talking about some personal matters in my life and whatnot, then go ahead and go listen to that. It's called What It Means to Be a Man in a World Gone Mad. And so I guess, from that title, you can kind of assume what it's about, right? I talk about, myself and masculinity, being a man, kind of what that means and what it means in our culture, which is, in my opinion, toxic, very toxic culture that we live in, a sick kind of culture. And, there's a lot of factors that go into making it that way, right? I mean, it's not just like, there's toxic masculinity. Well, there's also, feminazis, and there's also all sorts of other things that go into making up the collective canvas that we all exist on. You can't just pinpoint one thing and say it's that. So anyway, if you want to listen to me for 2.5 hours, go ahead and listen to that. This is going to be, I'm pretty sure this is going to be, it's either this or I might release like a short one before I leave, but this is probably the last episode before I leave on my trip. If you don't know, I am heading to Peru to work at residency program at the Temple of the Way of Light, Ayahuasca Center. And it's been kind of a I don't necessarily want to say it's been a dream of mine, but it's been something that I've been thinking about a lot since I had my experience there, and I'm very excited to go back. And honestly, I'm just excited to be in a role where I can be of service, helping people, and at the same time also help myself. And I think that's what I'm going to get there. The ability to work on myself. And I think when we all take the time when we all take the time and work on ourselves, we do help others, because when we improve ourselves, we're one less thing to worry about. We're out of the we're sort of out of the way, and then we can kind of help other people who don't necessarily have the tools and the skills and the abilities to heal themselves of the suffering that they may be going through. So I'm very excited. There are great people down there, and it's a great place, and I'm just really excited to get back to it. And actually, this reminds me of recently I listened to. So I never really talk about this, but I started podcasting because I would listen to podcasts. I just listened to a lot of podcasts, and then I got invited to be on one, and I did the podcast with Dave Smith, and I would continue to just be a huge fan of podcasting. I was doing stand-up comedy in New York City at the time, and I was walking dogs during the day. Great day job for a comedian, by the way. Unbelievable day job. And you get to hang out with dogs all day. I mean, it's fantastic. The downside, you got to pick up crap. Okay, that's maybe people are like, that's it. I'm not doing that. But, it was pretty cool. Made a decent amount of money. Was able to do comedy at night. And I also got to listen to like 5 or 6 podcasts a day. And sometimes I would just pop in audiobooks because, you're out, you're walking around. You got the dogs, you got the headphones, you're good. That's all you need. I don't need to talk to anybody. I don't need to do anything. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to just consume so much. And I really took that opportunity to learn a lot. But I'm subscribed to maybe 40 or so podcasts. And I don't get I don't have the time to listen to all of them now. I listen to, I guess, I kind of subscribe and I see them when they come in, and sometimes I save them for later. But a couple of my favorite podcasts are Tangentially Speaking by Dr. Christopher Ryan, author of the book Sex at Dawn, author of the forthcoming book Civilized to Death. Big fan of that dude. And I also past podcast guest Thaddeus Russell, who is an excellent human being as well. Huge fan of his. And so both of these guys came out with books around the same time, Sex at Dawn and Renegade History to the United States, A Renegade's Guide to the United States, by Thaddeus Russell, and Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan. They both came out around, I think, 2010, and I read both of them, and immediately, it was like, whoa, like my mind my mind was like constantly getting blown by new information. I was just constantly having mind explosions, whether it was listening to the Tom Woods show, or if it was, reading Sex at Dawn, reading Food of the Gods, Graham Hancock, Fingerprints of the Gods, and Food of the Gods is Terence McKenna, and then Thaddeus Russell's book. And now Thaddeus Russell has a podcast called Unregistered, and it's great. It's really great. I mean, this guy it seems like he was born to do this. It's a really great show. I mean, he asks great questions, and his mentality is in line with somebody who is right on, we're right on the same page. When I had Thad on this show, we talked a little bit about psychedelics, but he's not so much in that crowd of things, but he is of the crowd of being somebody who is, for freedom to say things that you're, as he says in the intro of his show, not supposed to say, like the dangerous ideas that, the ideas that we're not supposed to talk about, the stuff that the mainstream doesn't really cover, the people who are deemed to be naughty and not acceptable by our polite society, the vagabonds and the tramps and the these sorts of the weirdos and the freaks and the hippies and the people that polite society casts away. He kind of is like a sort of a spokesman, for these people, because there's great value in societies having these kinds of people. And he doesn't really identify himself as a libertarian, but he's definitely like a libertine, a person who enjoys freedom and liberty. I'll just say that. But anyway, I listened to his latest podcast with Dr. Christopher Ryan, and it was great. Whenever those guys get together, they always talk about great things. So, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's like these are the people that I learn from. These are the people that I read their books, I listen to their podcasts, and then I start to think about ideas that I've discovered in my own experience, in my own research, and then I go, oh yeah, like this lines up, this thing that Christopher Ryan's saying lines up exactly with this thing that Gabor Mate is saying. Oh, I want to see if that actually correlates with something that Thaddeus Russell was talking about. Yeah, that does. All right, cool. And I wonder if this would, equate to something that Lysander Spooner was talking about. And then maybe this also applies to something that Murray Rothbard wrote about. Oh, wow, holy shit. Yeah, that does connect. Interesting. So it's so this is where I gather, this is where I go to the well to get a lot of my ideas from. And one of the ideas that I love so much is Christopher Ryan's idea of why we're so civilized to death. Why what did we lose on this train of progress to modernity? It's like I love his and then by hearing him talk about this, it made me go and investigate and read books like Society Against the State, The Art of Not Being Governed, these sorts of kind of, books about our tribal past. And anyway, I made a clip because I think Dr. Christopher Ryan really succinctly explains his thesis of Civilized to Death, or as he would say, his spiel. And yeah, go check that out. It's a podcast clip, Civilized to Death, Dr. Christopher Ryan, unregistered podcast with Thaddeus Russell. It's on YouTube, and I'll put the link in the show notes. Now, talking about people to learn from and, books to read and things like that, this leads me into today's guest. Today's guest is a best-selling author, lawyer, historian, lay theologian, antiquarian. I hope I pronounced that right. I've never said that word before. Antiquarian, jurist, and philosopher. It's none other than Robert W. Sullivan IV. Robert W. Sullivan IV, the author of the Royal Arch of Enoch, the author of Cinema Symbolism and Cinema Symbolism 2, and as well as The Witches of Highgate, A Pact with the Devil. This was really great. I think I was on Twitter, and I was talking about symbols in movies or something, or I think I was actually mentioning something to Miguel Connor about the new Blade Runner movie. And Robert was like, I don't know, me and him just started talking about movies. And then I went and I was like, holy shit, he's got these books. I mean, this is right up my alley. And it's funny because it's not funny really, but I mean, it's interesting how and when you find out about certain people, because I just started to this past year, and I guess you guys can guess a little bit with some of the guests I've had: Julian Vane, Gordon White, Miguel Connor, other kinds of people, talking about magic and occultism and symbolism and these sorts of things. And I'm very, 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 very interested in this area because I know so very little about it. And it's just fascinating to me. So when me and Robert were talking, I said, of course, yeah, come on my podcast, please. I'd love to find out more about this stuff. I'm so glad that another door, has opened. And I said this on the podcast before, but they asked me a question about what I learned most in 2017. It was the thing that I learned the most is that learning never stops. There's so much out there. We're never going to learn all of it, but this is a particular area of interest that I feel like connects to the sort of psychedelic consciousness, field that I'm so interested in. I'm, of course, a big fan of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, and I love movies so much, and obviously I'm curious about Freemasonry, right? Because Robert is a 32nd degree Freemason. And we talk about this in the show. We talk all about this in the show about Freemasonry. What is it? Maybe some misconceptions, some offshoot branches, rogue branches, these sorts of things. And but we get into the movies pretty heavily too. We talk all about the movies, and you guys will see this is a really cool episode. I was really happy to have Robert on. He's a super interesting guy and a really passionate guy. You get the sense that, I mean, obviously somebody who is writing 690-page books about philosophy and symbolism, Masonic rituals, which is the Royal Arch of Enoch, the Impact of Masonic Ritual, philosophy, symbolism. When you're talking with somebody like this, that they're super passionate about these things. It's not like one of these stupid self-help gurus that's 10 steps to unfuck your life, just you can do it. Step 2, you can do it again. It's no, there's a really deep, rich history here of ancient sort of knowledge and symbols and philosophy and psychology, and it's just so interesting to me. Like I said, I just want to dive into this even further, and I will upon my return. But if anybody is interested, if you listen to this show and you're interested, obviously all the links to Robert's work will be in the show notes. Robert will tell you where to go himself, and I look forward to talking with Robert again. He's a very interesting guy, very passionate guy, and a very intelligent guy, and I love talking about these movies. There's some of my favorite movies: Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Blade Runner. I love stories of myths and monsters and heroes and villains and damsels in distress and the whole nine. It's just super fascinating to me, the archetypes and the collective unconscious and all of those sorts of things and the impact that they have. But enough from me. You guys know what to do if you love this show. Like it, share it, subscribe, spread it around, tell your friends, tell your family members, tell everybody, tell your dogs, cats, lizards, snakes, whoever. And and if you want to go a step further, just leave us a nice 5-star review on iTunes. You can even go to Patreon if you want. That's www.patreon. Do you have to say the www dots anymore? You don't have to say the www dots anymore. Go to patreon.com/MikeBrank. And you can even make a one-time donation. I got a PayPal link. That's on my website at MikeBrank.com. I love you all. And I really will see you on the other side. This might be the last you're hearing from me for another. I might not release a show for about another month. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode, and talk to you later. All right. Without further ado, Robert W. Sullivan IV. Enjoy.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Or is it perception?
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
This is very fascinating to me. I'm so glad that you're here to talk about these things, because I'm so curious, and I hope you wouldn't mind explaining to me and my listeners what this kind of arena that you're operating in is all about. It would be wonderful, and then we could talk about some movies. So, how did this all begin for you? What brought you into this field of knowledge and curiosity? What piqued your curiosity about this?
Right. For me, it was always something that had just been there. When I was a child growing up, dating myself, when I was I will date myself. I was born in 1971. When I was growing up, there was no internet or there was no cable TV. I mean, we eventually got cable TV, but I was probably around 10, 11 years old. And the one show that I just always remembered watching, and I just really was hooked on it, was the old Leonard Nimoy In Search Of. And UFOs and cryptozoology and the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and ghosts, and the occult. This was just something that just always fascinated me. I just was always interested in it, and just researching it and reading about it and reading about the different personalities about it. In the groups, the Freemasons, the Odd Fellows, the Golden Dawn. Certainly people like Aleister Crowley, John Dee. McGregor Mathers, and even the more the politically connected guys, like Rasputin. Mm-hmm. This was just something that always interested me, and it was just one of those things that ever since growing up, I always read and watched movies about it or documentaries about it, and it always stuck with me, and that's sort of the books, I suppose, were a continuation of this. It was just like a logical step. This interest level just really peaked for me, and I thought, well, now instead of just being the person who's reading about it and taking the information in, let me be the person who's now putting it out there. So it seemed like the next logical step for me, and that's pretty much where I'm at with it. It's funny too, because really the kernel. I won't go for much longer, but really the Royal Arch of Enoch was, and I've been on other shows and I've said this before, so I'm not going to belabor the point, was really a product of 20 years worth of research. And it was almost like one thing led to another. When Royal Arch came out, it was the last chapter dealt with Masonic, symbolism hidden in film. And that chapter, was from that last chapter that the next book was born out of, which was Cinema Symbolism. And then when I was writing that, I thought to myself, well, there's more movies I want to talk about, but I can't because the book will just go on. So let me do a sequel to it. And then when I was writing the first cinema book, I had this dream, this very lucid dream, which eventually became A Pact with the Devil, the Highgate Witches, the first series of that. So it was almost like one thing led to another. And I certainly didn't plan this out this way, but it happened. And, I'm always thrilled to come on podcasts and radio shows and talk about my research and what I'm doing. So you ask me anything you want to.
Awesome. Thanks. That was great. Yeah. The Royal Arch of Enoch, that was your first book. And, you're like, yeah, one thing led to another. And it was a culmination of 20 years work. I mean, it's like a 600 and plus 90-page book or something like that, right? Like that's pretty big. That's a hefty load right there.
Right. The Royal Arch was really the acorn that grew the mighty oak that was the Royal Arch. Started when I was in Oxford University in 1992. I never matriculated there, but I was an associate student there. And this was really where I got introduced to this whole idea of the Hermetic tradition, the occult philosophies, really influencing material culture, influencing society, popular culture, whether it be John Dee with Queen Elizabeth, the Freemasons crafting the United States. This is really the time that, where this really peaked for me. And I wasn't a Freemason yet, but I started researching and reading about it. I had already had a background in this. So, I wasn't, this wasn't like, coming to this for the first time. I mean, I knew some material, but I didn't know others. So
right.
This was, really a good starting point for me. And it was a few years later in 1996. This was after I got out of college, but before I went to law school. I petitioned a Masonic Lodge to join a Masonic Lodge. I come from a long line of Masons here in Maryland, so it seemed like the logical thing to do. And it was something I had always wanted to do anyway. So I went through the rituals and I joined the Scottish Rite, which is a high degree body. And certainly going through the rituals and seeing them really adds to your knowledge. And the Royal Arch was really just researching and writing this 20 years of this one particular high degree ritual and how it was being used to craft the United States. And what I eventually wound up doing, Mike, was I took that 20 years of research. The book was eventually published in 2012. It was subsequently has been republished by me in December of 16. But I turned that 20 years on Hollywood. And then, I did the first movie book, and that came out at 14, but again was republished by me last year. And then Cinema Symbolism 2, and then I finally got out this work of fiction that I had no intention of writing. I just had this very lucid dream when I was actually writing the first movie book. But I liked it enough, and I turned that into a book. And I'm actually, believe it or not, right now working on 5 books at once. Although I'm going to.
That's multitasking. Yeah.
Yeah, you ain't kidding. And it's really going to start probably next week, where I'm just going to focus on this one more than the others at this point. But there it is. And 4 books. You turn around and before you know it, 4 books are out. It's like, wow, where did the time go?
Yeah, and I mean, when you dive into a book like that, I mean, it's going to be packed with so much information. I mean, we're not going to be able to go over everything that, I'm curious about and, my listeners are curious about right now, but hopefully we can give people a taste, and that would be really great. And I hope you wouldn't mind maybe kind of taking a step back a little bit and talking just a little bit about, I think that from an outsider's perspective, somebody that doesn't really have an entry point into this world and knowledge of this stuff might hear words like Freemason, occultism. They might hear these sorts of words, Hermeticism, and they might not necessarily know exactly what they mean. Maybe it's swirled up in a bunch of mystery and some confusion, some true things, some false things. So what is it about? I mean, maybe you can kind of help explain a little bit about what it means to be a Mason and what some of these terms mean and kind of,
Sure.
Obviously I think maybe there's good and bad with everything, right? So maybe that we can clear some things up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions out there with it. There's a lot of bad material about it. In of itself, Freemasonry officially, as it exists today, was born in England, in London, on June 24th, 1717. Now, there were Masonic guilds craftsman guilds, engineering guilds, working on the continent of Europe, working in Scotland, working on England, Masonic lodges that pre-existed this. This is irrefutable. There were hermetic groups, studying the Hermetic tradition, the occult, the esoteric, groups like the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar. These all were what I call proto-Masonic groups. But Masonry proper, as it exists today, officially, quote unquote, comes onto the scene in 1717. It's a fraternal body. It's a fraternal order. It does a lot of charity work. In its rituals, I believe, are concealed greater truths. It is not explained to you what these truths are, even after you go through it. It is really up, the best way I can describe it is the Masonic teachings and the philosophies and the rituals will put you on the path. It's up to you to walk it. So for instance, you could join a Masonic lodge, go through the rituals and come out thinking, yeah, that was kind of some weird, rituals I went through. Okay, what's for dinner tonight? Think nothing of it. If you really start to look in depth, and very few Masons do this, some do, I consider myself one of them, but very few do. If you start looking and researching the symbolism of the ritual and the allegory, you're going to start opening your eyes up to these greater truths that are sort of hidden all around us, but are there, and it's definitely documented. It's a very influential organization. I mean, it helped found the United States. In fact, in the book, I say that a lot of the founding principles of the United States come straight out of the Masonic Lodge. But again, it's really not conspiratorial. Many of the founders were Freemasons, so this shouldn't really come as a shock to anybody. It has a very interesting history. Freemasonry really cuts across a lot of categories, and I think that's one of the things that I find so fascinating about it. I mean, it deals with philosophy, it deals with ancient religions, it deals with Christianity, Judaism, even Islam. It deals with the occult, hidden things, hidden symbols, and symbols with different meanings. It deals with political allegory, and certainly has a political influence with Masons who went on to be president or something like that, or and it deals with architecture, civil engineering, operative masonry, the creation of city designs and buildings can be Masonically influenced. So it really cuts across a lot of topics, even popular culture, movies. I mean, you can find Freemasonic movies, for God's sakes. Mm-hmm. So it really does cut across a lot of topics, and it really is. I mean, I couldn't just go into it, but I mean, you're dealing with not only the Blue Lodge, which is the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, but then you get into the high degrees. You get into these different sort of competing philosophies and religious ideas. It's a very deep subject. It's very complex, but it really, Freemasonry does encompass so much, and I think that's really one of the things that really fascinated me about it. It does have like these splinter groups off of it, like the Illuminati and things like that. I mean, that's a real group. They don't really exist anymore. I know some people think they do, but they were around. And like I said, when it comes to it, you're just dealing with so many themes in history, philosophy, religion. It just encompasses so much. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Right. Well, good explanation there, because that is, and you mentioned the Illuminati, because sometimes, for somebody who's not aware of this sort of thing, they hear Freemason, maybe they'll just automatically think that that's like synonymous with Illuminati or something like that. Just kind of everything kind of gets jumbled into their brains, and I kind of can't blame them, because it's like they don't. How are they going to investigate all this stuff? But it is something that influences us, and it does, show up everywhere we look. And it's funny because the Illuminati, actually, I saw a Taco Bell commercial recently where Taco Bell was kind of making light of the Illuminati, and it was like, go to it's the Bell Illuminati. Like they had some kind of secret ritual they were doing at a Taco Bell, and they used the all-seeing eye and the pyramid and that kind of stuff. Maybe we could start talking a little bit about some of that stuff, because it is so fascinating, and there are so many people that are curious about this stuff, but like I said, don't really know or know where to start. But the pentagram as a symbol, and the Egyptian symbology and these sorts of things. Maybe we can get into talking a little bit about that and how it's like you kind of see that everywhere. And you also mentioned that this stuff is all around us, kind of hiding in plain sight, if you will, right? I mean, it's not necessarily hiding, but it's right there, right?
Right. Yeah, I've seen the Taco Bell ads also. I think they're very funny. With the Illuminati. I mean, it was a real group, and it certainly has influence. A lot of Masonic symbolism. One of the things I would really stress to you and the listeners when analyzing this, or when researching or looking into it, is especially when you're dealing with symbolism, and especially with esoteric symbolism or Masonic symbolism, is the context of how it's presented really dictates a lot of what is going on. So the pentagram, for instance, could mean something one way, but if you put it in another context, could mean something completely different. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, and this is the same thing with a lot of the movie symbolism. One thing in one movie, a symbol or a number presented one way could have esoteric meaning in another movie, but just different meaning. So like the pentagram, for instance, I mean, this is a symbol that's been completely co-opted by the Church of Satan. You have the 2 points up with the 1 point down, which is left-hand path. This is, what is commonly known as the goat of Mendes. But, in Freemasonry, it doesn't symbolize that at all. It's what in Freemasonry is referred to as the blazing star. The pentagram can have numerous meanings. One of them has to do with the mathematician Pythagoras. The pentagram can symbolize, the 4 points can symbolize the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and the 5th point can symbolize the ether, your mastery of the 4 elements. So, when you're dealing with symbolisms, and especially, I hear all the time from a lot of the people in the conspiracy world, there's the Masons using a pentagram. That means they're Satanists. I mean, this is totally false. A symbol presented one way by one group and another group takes it. It has a completely different meaning. I mean, the swastika is another one of these.
Right. Yes.
You will find the symbol all over the place with Native American Indians, mm-hmm. even with Buddhists, mm-hmm. and the Hebrews use this symbol, symbolizing the sun in motion. Of course, this is a symbol that was obviously co-opted years later by the Nazis. So we have to be cautious when we get into this. In Masonry, in the Blue Lodge and in the 3rd degree, you are dealing with, and this is again one of the things that I just find so interesting about this, is a lot of comparative religion. We deal with themes of Gnosticism, ideas of divine awakening, divine spark ignition. We have a retelling in the Blue Lodge in the 3rd degree of what I would call the simplest way to put this is what I would call where the candidate becomes the dying and resurrected God, Sun Man, archetype or motif. This is the Egyptian mythology. Of course, this runs parallel with Christianity, where the candidate is killed and ultimately resurrected. It's very Egyptian. This is, of course, where the candidate is portraying the Egyptian god Osiris, mm-hmm. And he is resurrected. This is a little deep waters here, but I'll do my best to condense the answer. In Egyptian mythology, when Osiris was killed by Set, he was risen from the grave by his virgin consort wife, Isis. And the way he was risen was she had possessed the secret name of a sun god named Amun-Ra. And what this secret name was, we don't know. We don't know what it was. But it was through the correct pronunciation of this name that she was able to resurrect Osiris and then birth a sun god named Horus. Mm. And then Osiris goes off to become sort of the Lord of the Dead, as it were. In Masonry, this is echoed with this, where the candidate is portraying Hiram Abiff, and then he's killed and resurrected, as the Osiris character is. When the candidate is brought back to life, he is raised on what is called the 5 points of fellowship. And the 5 points, of course, 5 points form a pentagram. And in Masonry, the pentagram signifies something called the blazing star. And if you read your Albert Pike, you'll know that the blazing star is the Egyptian dog star Sirius, which associates with Isis, the virgin wife of Osiris.
Right.
When the candidate's brought
brightest
back
star
to life,
in the sky, by the way. Yeah.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
When the candidate's brought back to life, he has a substitute word whispered in his ear, which is the name of God, only it's not the real name of God. It's a substitute word. The real name of God is lost. Hiram Abiff has it, but when he's killed, it's lost. It's recovered in this high degree ceremonial known as the Royal Arch of Enoch. So we have this deep Egyptian motif, solar motif going on. I mean, when the body's buried, when Hieroglyph's body, his grave is concealed with something called a sprig of acacia. That's a flower sacred to the sun god Apollo. When the candidate is brought back to life, he's raised on what's called the strong grip of a lion's paw. Lion, Leo, ruled by the sun. So we have this whole dead, resurrected sun man motif. You'll see the parallel with Christianity, of course, with Jesus being resurrected as well. So we have this going on inside the Blue Lodge, this studying comparative religion, where the candidate is symbolically killed and brought back to life, resurrected with this substitute name of God, invoking the 5 points, invoking the pentagram, invoking Isis, and where the candidate would symbolize the resurrected sun god Osiris. We have this very deep comparative religious symbolism story going on inside the Blue Lodge. I'm going through this as quickly as possible just because of time. It's a deep study, but again, if you're interested in Masonic symbolism and things like that, by all means, take a look at the book. I get it in much more depth. And you're absolutely correct, Mike. I mean, when you're dealing with Masonic symbolism and architecture, when you develop the eye for it and you understand the context, it definitely becomes much more easy to spot and notice. And again, this is especially true with the movie symbolism. It's one of those things where if you start knowing what to look for based on the context of the movie, the esoteric symbolism will start bubbling to the surface.
Yes, that's right. And I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and it was through Joseph Campbell I kind of went backwards to Jung and the Freud, and it's interesting because you just from their analysis of things and their stories, and Joseph Campbell, of course, the hero's journey, the monomyth, and the archetypes. You see it. It starts to come out. The world starts to become more alive with story and metaphor and myth and meaning, and symbols become energized with different kinds of powers and interpretations. It's really fascinating, and that's I'm just at the tip of the iceberg with a lot of this, but it's definitely piqued my interest tremendously. It's interesting as you were talking. You mentioned that. Right. I mean, you brought up, the Nazi symbol, and it was actually, I think I saw somewhere it was in a Buddhist practice used as a symbol for peace. And the Nazis co-opted this, right? They took it, and we see that happening a lot, right? We see that happening, and I know that I used to see that happening a lot with, I was big into kind of the liberty movement. I noticed that a lot of politicians, it seems like they just pay lip service to the words liberty. They kind of hijack the terms and the meanings and don't really use the true kind of moral, they don't use it in its full form with the integrity. And that seems to just, that's something that can happen. And that's something that I think with it confuses a lot of people because you start to see these things everywhere. Also, I saw a cool graphic comic book written by Douglas Rushkoff, and I forgot who else illustrated it, but it was called Alistair and Adolf. And it was very fascinating. It was about the kind of, I guess it would be called sigil magic. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about the Nazi symbol and how they were winning the war because they had the power of the symbol. And Crowley, and I think it was Ian Fleming was involved as well, the author of James Bond. They came up with the V for victory symbol to help Britain win the war. Sorry, I was a little all over the place with that, but yeah, I mean that's kind of where my train of thought had led me to. I don't, I think that this is leading me to getting into kind of where I'm really fascinated with, and because I've been a fan of movies my whole life, and I'm really noticing these sorts of things come out in the movies that I love. Star Wars is probably one of my favorite movie series of all time. Lord of the Rings, huge fan of that movie trilogy, and Harry Potter, of course. So these are all examples that you give in your book. And of course, Blade Runner as well is another one. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of those. If you want, we could start with Star Wars.
Oh, absolutely. No, Star Wars and like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings are essentially the Campbell monomyth, as you pointed out. The hero's journey. The what I call the solar hero. Who goes on this adventure to defeat a dark overlord of some kind. Think the sun is dark versus light. What would best be called, sort of neo-Manichaeanism, light versus dark. think Zoroastrianism, or if you're into the Bible, God versus the devil. This would be, Harry Potter versus Voldemort. Luke versus the Sith Lords. Sauron and Frodo. So yeah, I mean, you have this hero's journey. I like. It's very archetypal. The one character that's always in these things is the hermit figure, the wizard archetype. I mean, you just look at like Kenobi and Dumbledore and Gandalf. I mean, they all look alike.
Right.
It's essentially the same character. So yeah, you're just kind of like with those movies, you're almost just rebranding. It's all but the same adventure of some kind. It's the idea of the commoner plucked from the doldrums of society to go on this magical, mystical adventure to defeat some dark overlord of some kind. So, this is the quintessential, monomyth. Those are fascinating. In Star Wars, there's a little more hidden imagery in all of them, actually. I haven't seen the last one yet, The Last Jedi. I haven't seen that yet, but I've seen 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and 6. I've seen 7. And I saw Rogue One. And all these movies are, peppered with little esoteric imagery. I mean, even with the 4, 5, and 6, where you have this Egyptian motif going on, where Luke is, the solar figure. I mean, the name Luke Skywalker. The name Luke comes from Latin lux, meaning light. What light walks across the sky? The sun. In comparative mythology, this would be Apollo, and of course Apollo has the lunar sister Leia, or Diana, excuse me, and of course Luke has Leia, who's always running around in the white robes of the moon. Comparatively, Apollo in Egyptian mythology is Horus, and Horus does battle with a dark overlord named Seth. So of course we have the Sith in Star Wars, the dark overlords. So yeah, we have this whole Egyptian comparative. I mean, he does very little adroit things in the films. I mean, if you go into the first movies, I mean, I thought the one that was really clever was, he kind of was doing this consciously, where I believe it's in the second one, Attack of the Clones, where the whole thing represents childbirthing, which is where when Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to Kamino, which is where the clones are being made. It's divestment of the sacred feminine, but this is where humans are being made. So when he gets there, it's this turbulent storm with the water raging outside on the surface of the planet.
Right.
And of course, this is signifying the birthing process of the woman. Of the female, the breaking the water coming out, but what's great is when he gets inside, it's sterile. It's completely dull and boring. And this is because the clones are coming from a man, and there's no women anywhere, and everything is dull and sterile. But yet the Kamino person tells Obi-Wan, he says, well, Jango Fett, that's the man who they're using to make the clones off of, suffers great pain. And again, this is paralleling the birthing process for the woman. Even he has to suffer pain for the clones to be made. And it's interesting because all the clones, are male. And if you fast forward into 4, 5, 6, the Empire is nothing but men. There's no sacred feminine. There's no females anywhere. They've completely divested themselves of it. I mean, all it is this male hierarchy with the Empire. You could say that's one of the reasons why they fail. It's not there's no incorporation of the sacred feminine. So you'll find that in Star Wars, and yeah, absolutely. Just I'll wrap up with the thing with Crowley and Bond. Yeah, that's one of my favorite talking points. That was something I covered in the first movie book. The whole story with Aleister Crowley and Ian Fleming. I've talked about this on other shows. That definitely comes out of the world of you can't make this stuff up.
Right.
With Crowley, being a spy, a double agent in World War I and World War II, and the guy who was his handler in British intelligence was none other than Ian Fleming. The man who wrote the James Bond stories. And, Crowley came up with the whole V, the 2 points up, 3 fingers down, 32. For Churchill, this was sort of to counteract the Nazi swastika. You had the whole thing. If you go into the James Bond stories, they're overloaded with hermetic themes and occult themes in the James Bond stories. I mean, even the sigil, 007, is John Dee's sigil 007 when he wrote to Queen Elizabeth. He was involved in the spying to protect her. And when he wrote correspondences to her, it was 007. That's where 007 comes from.
Oh.
And then, and then the other one that was crazy was when Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, flew from Germany to England to try to negotiate a peace. He crash landed in Scotland, and they captured him, of course, and put him in the Tower of London. And Crowley actually went to Fleming, and this is true, and said, I'm a ceremonial magician. I'm an expert in the occult. We know Hess is into astrology. We know a lot of the Nazi higher ups are into the occult. And this is very true. I mean, Hitler was, Himmler was, Goebbels was into Nostradamus. Hess was into astrology big time. So Crowley went to Fleming and said, well, let me go see this guy. Let me go see Rudolf Hess in the Tower of London. He said, I'll perform some rituals in front of him, conjure a demon or two and scare the living hell out of this guy. And, maybe we can, get some information out of him. And the story is that Fleming liked the idea and actually went to Winston Churchill with it. But Churchill put the ixnay on it, so it never happened. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when you start researching this stuff. I mean, again, the world of Freemasonry is loaded with this stuff. If you can't make this stuff up, and that's certainly a very fascinating story. And again, this was something I talked about in the first movie book. And yeah, absolutely, I love the James Bond stories, and I'm a big fan of the movies. And just overloaded with a lot of esoteric and hermetic themes and imagery.
That's fascinating because on one level you can watch these movies as a simple kind of male fantasy of, get the girl, save the day, get the bad guy. And on a deeper level, you can watch them over and over again, trying to spot the symbolism in them. It's fantastic. So I wanted to say, like, you're talking about these like amazing tales of the past, the story of Horus and Set, and that story is a fantastic story. And these are sort of, I guess, myths of old, right? And nowadays we have this rich, immersive cinema experience that's sort of almost ritualistic, right? I mean, you go to a theater, you're sitting in the dark, there's the only thing that's bright in the whole room is the movie that's packed with, everything that the director and the producer and everything chose. They chose for a particular reason. I've worked on movies, some small movie sets before in college and stuff, and everything is meticulously planned out, and the shirt color to the hat on somebody. So it's fascinating. And it's sort of, it's kind of our modern day ritual to go to the movie and to enjoy a story. And obviously, we always enjoy the stories that are really packed with meaning and purpose. Would you consider this to be like our new mythology of our times?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with your assessment there. I think absolutely movies are mythology making. I think you could craft the argument. And I think you're spot on. A lot of it is just rebranding or renaming these movies. You will find the religious archetypes. Whether it be Set. With the Egyptian mythology, it sort of runs parallel with the Christian. That's a different story. I get into that much more in the book, but that's not a coincidence. But absolutely, I mean, you look at like for instance. You get into the Christ archetype, the Savior archetype, the solar hero, the solar God man. I mean, this is, Luke Skywalker, who does battle with the dark evil Lord and defeats the dark evil Lord. You look at, Lord of the Rings, same thing. You got the hermit archetype. I call it the Hermes Trismegistus archetype, the god of magic. So you find the Christ imagery there, and in mythology, Hermes Trismegistus prophesies the coming of Jesus Christ. You've got themes. Harry Potter, the same thing. Killed in, doing battle with the dark evil Lord. You have Harry Potter being killed and resurrected. In the Matrix, same thing. Right. Neo being from the population doing battle with the dark evil Lord, the machines killed and resurrected. So you have, a lot of, religious mythological symbolism going on. I mean, and those examples are kind of obvious, but you'll find it in other stuff. Superman, the only begotten Son sent down from the Heavenly Father to teach mankind the error of his ways by performing miracles. And, in the 1977 one with Christopher Reeve, I mean, he resurrects the dead. He resurrects Lois Lane. The Green Mile, John Coffey, J.C., dies for the sins of the South and performs miracles by healing the sick and resurrects the little dead mouse. The John Connor, J.C., virgin birth, from a father from the future, and does battle, savior of mankind, does battle with the dark evil machines.
Terminator, yeah.
Yeah, and The Day the Earth Stood Still, the benevolent space alien who comes down from the heavens to teach mankind the error of his ways, and they call him Carpenter. So yeah, I mean, you will find this stuff there. It's very well hidden though.
Right,
a lot of times, and it's finding the correct context of what these guys are trying to talk about. And I was fascinated enough by it, and absolutely convinced 100% that this was intentional. I do not believe this is to be a coincidence, that I wrote 2 books about it, and I'm currently outlining a third.
Excellent. Yes. And I wanted, you brought up prophesized. You said that word in it, and it just struck with me because, I'm thinking like, there's it can be kind of on your website, right? You have an excerpt from Cinema Symbolism too, more esoteric imagery and popular movies. And you say cinema can also be prophetic. Thomas Neo Anderson's passport expires September 11th, 2001. So and it's like we definitely see messages like we definitely see things like this popping up in cinema where they're sort of predicting events. And I know there's like a famous Simpsons one going around where the Simpsons people are saying Matt Groening is a time traveler, and people are coming up with all kinds of crazy theories. But maybe it's not so crazy when you understand that this goes, this is something that's being done intentionally, or maybe there's people that are doing things with certain agendas or something. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. How could we explain some of these prophetic, predictive events in cinema?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because I believe that the imagery in films is intentional. But so, how do we account for this? I mean, and there is, some of the stuff with 9/11, when you get back in time, I think it's a little, the farther away you move and back in time away from it, I think you are getting into a little bit of a coincidence. But when you get close to it, I mean, you're definitely seeing some things that are popping up that really can't be explained. The Neo passport one, and the reason why that is so important is that movie has to do with death of the old, rebirth to the new. And some people have timed that the 9/11 has to do with the is a event timed to the end of the old age of Pisces, the start of the new age of Aquarius. And then you had that year in 01, back in March of 01, there was a Fox TV show called The Lone Gunman. Which was a spinoff of the X-Files. And the first episode, the pilot episode, dealt with terrorists hijacking planes in a false flag and flying them into the World Trade Center. And that was just, 4 or 5 months, before the actual thing. And then the other one that was really screwy was The Patriot, which came out in the summer of 2000. So about 15, 16 months before 9/11 was, if you watch The Patriot with Mel Gibson, he at the very beginning of it, he's making a chair in his barn, and he takes the chair and he weighs it, and the chair weighs exactly 9 pounds 11 ounces, and then he takes the chair off the scale and sits on it, and it comes crashing down. I thought that was
wow.
I thought that one was a really screwy one. Wow. So I've often asked myself, how do you account for this? And really, one of the if you exclude time travel and I mean, it's really hard for me it's really difficult for me to believe that, that these filmmakers are, planting this in there and have foreknowledge of this. I mean, that doesn't really kind of add up to me. So nevertheless, it is there. So how do you account for it? I turn to the world of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist. And what he talked about was this theory that comes from the Greek philosopher Plato. And Plato called this thing the theory of forms. And what Jung called it was the collective unconscious. And what he said was And what I'm about to say is somewhat controversial, and this can't be proven. This is just my hypothesis or theory on this. What Jung said was that there were these certain archetypal imagery, all that we all have. It's passed down to us in our subconscious minds, and in this unconscious collective, dwells the archetypes and this archetypal imagery. Why do we know the color? Well, why do we know the color red is red? We just know it.
Right.
We know the color blue is blue when we see it. We don't know why, but we know that's blue and that's orange and that's green. We all know that's a table, that's a chair. It's the same thing with the archetypes. The wizard, the solar hero, the dark villain, the trickster, the lovers, the mother, the father. These are all archetypes that turn up in our subconscious mind and turn up in popular culture, especially in films. And what Jung said was this is all inherited in our subconscious mind. What I proposed in the books was if this is some sort of inherited mechanism that clearly is being repeated in film, whether it be Star Wars or Harry Potter or Frankenstein or you name it, could the collective unconscious also be inherited? Could it be predictive? Since what Jung is saying is it's all inherited, could this also could through the creation of art, which is what film is, could we be subconsciously being tuned into the future and be putting this material in the film or in our artwork unaware of it, yet it turns out to be true somehow? That's what I kind of think might be going on with this. Certainly I can't prove it, but that seems to be sort of a rational explanation to it, is that, since films are really an ultimate form of expression, ultimate artwork, could something like Neo's passport or the thing with Mel Gibson's chair, could this be the collective unconscious working in reverse and working as a predictive mechanism? I can't prove that. It's just my hypothesis on it, but it does seem to make sense to me when you look at it. The 9/11 stuff isn't the only material. There are some other interesting, I talk about it in the book, some interesting instances where movies have been prophetic. It's more innocuous. It's not anything like 9/11, but it is strange, nevertheless. There was a film that came out. This one I just thought was really, really kind of weird. It was a movie that came out in the early 1980s. I want to say it came out in 82 or 83. It was a movie called Hanky Panky. And the movie kind of, I don't think it was a big box office hit. The movie starred Gene Wilder. And I think it was set on a train. It was like a murder mystery. And it was told to you over and over again. The character of this is innocuous, but I mean this did happen. The Gene Wilder character was from Chicago, and this was repeated several times in the movie. He was from Chicago, Illinois, and his character's name was Michael Jordan, of all things. And it was about 16 months after this movie came out that Michael Jordan, the basketball player, was drafted by the Chicago Bulls. And I mean, it's completely innocuous, but I mean, it is kind of the screwy thing going on, where you had this character named Michael Jordan from Chicago, Illinois, of all things. If you go watch
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean,
it's funny that you bring that up, though, now to me, because earlier today I was playing basketball with my brother, and I put on the Chicago Bulls theme song as they come out on the court, and I was just messing around doing the voice, and I was saying, "And now your Chicago Bulls welcome Michael Jordan." So that's kind of interesting that I was talking about Michael Jordan today, and then you bring him up now on the podcast, but.
Well, it's interesting because that's what's called synchronicity. That's where things are lined up. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the theme music that the Chicago Bulls came into, I don't know. Do you know what that's named?
Oh no, what's the name of it?
It's called Sirius.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's by the Alan Parsons Project.
Right.
And the name of the song
Alan
is
Parsons Project. Yes.
Yeah, it's called Sirius, the Egyptian dog star, which we were talking about.
Right.
So I mean, there you go. Very prophetic. Seems to have been anticipating our interview today. So yeah, there it is. There's a great example of it. This is, very synchronistic, that would be the case. So, the example that I give with the Gene Wilder movie, this is obviously totally innocuous, innocent, but there it is. And I can't account for it. It's just so screwy, that would happen. I document a few more in the books. I'm with you, Mike. I definitely believe you. I definitely believe it's there. And it's a fascinating study. That's really one of the ways I kind of justify it, is synchronicity, the collective unconscious as a prophetic mechanism. There definitely seems to be something to this, though.
Yeah, definitely. And, in my experience with the psychedelic state of consciousness, the altered state of consciousness, the psychedelic space, with meditation and kind of astral projection and these sorts of things, once you understand, I guess that the reality that we see in front of us isn't the only reality, that there's actually more to what meets the eye, of course, that it is quite possible. I do have a tendency, to believe that there is some kind of infinite, eternal kind of pool of collective unconscious that is going on, and maybe even some sort of historical memory field. I think Rupert Sheldrake talks about this with like a morphic resonant field or something, where there's all of these sorts of ideas and meanings that have symbols and meanings and numbers that have gone back for a long, long time, that mean something, that are coming to us and kind of maybe using people as conduits to project their symbolism and their messages, or something like this. And, in the creative state, sometimes I sketch, or, even when I'm sure you probably get into a creative flow state where it seems like, there's just time just passes by and it doesn't even exist anymore. And you're just, maybe you're writing and, something like that. And it's like, well, where is this creativity coming from? It almost seems like you're just the, mechanism that is making it work. It's maybe a symbiotic relationship between the conscious field of reality that we exist in now and this other world that we just kind of pull things from, or that come to us. Maybe, like you mentioned before, that the lucid dream that you had,
absolutely.
So yeah, this is pretty mind blowing stuff right here.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mike. I think you're spot on with this. I've done other shows with people who are into dream analysis, psychic vision, things of that nature, and they said to me, I make it perfectly clear when I first started doing this. I had no intention, none whatsoever, of ever writing a work of fiction. This was not something that I'd ever even planned on. And the dream came to me. It came to me in April of 2013. And this was right when, after Royal Arch had come out, and right when I was writing Cinema Symbolism, the first one, in earnest. And I had this very lucid dream. And, I wrote it down. I woke, the dream was very, very, very vivid. And I woke up and I made notes at my desk. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. The dream felt like it lasted all night. I had dialogue. I had character names, very vivid. I wrote it all down. And, I remember sitting there and I was starting to outline it. And, when I started talking to people about this, they kind of hinted at what you're suggesting, that, this was the creative process, that because you had written the one book and had done the other one, you had opened your mind up to this, conscious stream of intelligence that you didn't know was there, and that this book was, somewhat, beamed to you or gifted to you, because you had, opened your mind to the creative process. So, it could be. I have no idea, but it certainly feels that way to me, because, like I said, I had really no intention of doing this, but I was real happy with the way the book came out. In fact, so happy with it, I'm actually planning a sequel and a prequel to it. So, it just was one of those things that happened, and I didn't really plan on it. But I tend to agree with you that, you definitely open yourself up to, an altered state of consciousness, where things, become much more lucid, that you didn't know were there, but were there.
Right. Yes. And, with my experience working with indigenous shamans of Peru and the ayahuasca work that they do, and there is sort of this awareness that, there could be sort of bad spirits or negative energy or kind of, however you want to put it, that there could be kind of like dark forces out there. And I think that, sometimes we see, for me, I'm very aware of sort of movies that I see, maybe even a trailer or two that comes on. I go, well, clearly this is a propagandistic agenda being driven really, really, here. So I want to talk maybe a little bit about some of that kind of stuff. We could kind of talk a little bit about, if you feel comfortable talking about this, like, what do you think, and do you explain in the book at all about maybe some sort of dark entities or dark forces that are maybe trying to kind of shape the world in a particular way? Because maybe I could rephrase the question a little bit better, actually. What I'm trying to say is that I think that obviously, right? I mean, we're talking about Star Wars, and we're talking about the hero that has to fight the Dark Lord. Well, I think that it's safe to say that this is actually happening in our world now, and I think that it plays out in sort of different ways. I mean, no one's really taking a lightsaber to having a lightsaber fight, but maybe the kind of fights come through in different ways. And so there seems to be people working in the media, in Hollywood, and all over the place. Maybe, I don't know, do they have sort of a nefarious agenda? Maybe they want to keep people sort of asleep, kind of, like just drones and zombies, and just kind of complacent with the status quo. And then it seems like to me, hopefully what I can do on this show, and by having people like you on and stuff, is sort of alert people and kind of make them aware of what's going on a little bit. So, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, I never really saw it. Whenever I do the movie, analysis, I never saw any like dark motivation behind it. Some of it can be dark itself, but I mean, I never really found like some sort of dark. I mean, when you're dealing with hidden symbols, I mean, some people think, I guess, because it's hidden, it is. But the idea that it's hidden or not, fully, made available to your conscious mind, that by default makes it evil or something. I don't see it that way. I think a lot of times, I mean, what I describe a lot of the movie symbolism to, what I say it's akin to sacred geometry.
Right.
When you walk into one of these Gothic cathedrals, you can't specifically see the golden ratio. You can't see the Vesica Pisces, but you can see flying buttresses, and you can tell you're in an impressive structure designed to affect you. To make you believe you're in a temple of God, to impress this upon you, with the long naves and the vaulted ceilings and the flying buttresses. This is all intentionally done to affect you, humble you, make you believe that you're in a temple of worship, that you're closer to God. This is what I kind of say what is going on with akin to the movie symbolism. It's designed, now it's not on its surface, but it's designed to transform the movie into mythology. You're getting more than one story. You're getting these deep esoteric themes going on. These filmmakers are very adroit with hiding this stuff, especially people, like Stanley Kubrick and Darren Aronofsky. These guys really know what they're doing.
Right.
And are real masters at it. I mean, like The Shining has a lot of repetition in it. Crimson Peak has a lot of imagery that repeats from The Shining. Black Swan has an alchemical storyline. The Star Wars films have the monomyth. I never really interpreted this as this as evil.
Right.
I think it's hidden, but I never really saw a dark hand behind any of this. I mean, that's just my opinion on it. I think, to me personally, I thought this was much more interesting, and to study the lengths that these filmmakers will go and revealing this material. That to me was really a challenge, and was what really fascinated me. When I watch a film that's overloaded with symbolism, I never get the impression that, oh, this is evil,
right.
Or this is no good, or this is black magic. I mean, I think it's more of the filmmakers being very clever and being very adroit, and really trying to challenge the viewer to say, hey, man, can you pick up on some of this stuff? That's my take on it.
That's awesome. I think I agree with you 110% on that, because, right, it takes a certain level of I mean, it takes a very a high level of intelligence and curiosity and cleverness to do that, and for people to notice. And I think it's fantastic. And that is a sort of an awakening kind of experience of shaping and uplifting the human spirit to be closer to the divine and to the story and the power of myth. And the stuff that is kind of dark and kind of maybe demonic and dumbing us down is like, I don't know, Keeping Up with the Kardashians or something like that, right? Like, there's nothing. Exactly. It's just bland, dull, dumb, nothing entertainment. Yeah.
Right. Something like that. I mean, I think, like you said, that's just like, to put you to sleep almost.
Right.
But, you want even like a dark movie, like say like The Exorcist, for say, which I mean is a very, very dark film. That has very interesting symbolism in it. And again has a lot of veiled themes in it, again with light and dark, things like that. And again, it was just for me, when I watch a movie and I see something really interesting with it or pick up on something, I mean my reaction to it is, oh wow, look at that. Can you believe, my goodness gracious, I mean, here we go again. I can't believe I just saw that. That's fascinating, that they actually did that, thought enough of that to, put that in or alter the movie with it. That to me was, that's my reaction to it when I find it. Yeah. I've never had the reaction when I see it, like, oh my God, I'm being mind controlled or something like that. I've just been fascinated by the imagery, and that, these people will, the lengths these people will go to incorporate it. And it, it fascinated me so much, Mike, that, like I said, I wrote 2 books about it. So,
right.
There it was.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's like before when you were talking about how do we know red is red and that sort of thing. There is this kind of feeling that you get when you do spot these things in cinema and in the movies. It's like making that connection, and it's making that connection in a new and novel way because these archetypes have been redone and reformed and rebranded. So it is pretty, and reinvigorating to the soul almost to say, this is a hero I can get behind here. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I watched, a film or whatever, and I could start picking up on this stuff. It's, oh my goodness gracious. Okay, now I see what they're going for, and now I can really start to dissect it. And what it does is it tips you off to other things to look for, in the story. So, like I said, I've never seen it as dark. I mean, if you want to go down that route, I mean, the only way you could say it is, okay, it's being concealed from you. But, I don't believe if something's hidden, that doesn't necessarily make it evil.
Right.
It means maybe you need to, start learning how to decipher this stuff.
Step your game up. Yeah.
Yeah. Step your game up and figure out why it is.
Right.
But that's my take on it.
So I'm also curious to know some of your favorite movies. Maybe they'll line up with some of my favorite movies, and then maybe we can talk about that. So yeah, what are some movies that are really, your favorites, packed with symbolism and meaning, stuff that really hits home for you?
Right, sure. I'll caveat this answer or question just by saying this. I should point this out because it's important for the listeners. Not every movie has esoteric imagery in it.
Right.
I only analyze movies that I'm 100% convinced it's going on in them. And not having it doesn't necessarily make the movie bad. Mm-hmm. For instance, I'm a big fan of the movie Reservoir Dogs. But nothing going on. Maybe a couple archetypes here and there, but by and large, entertaining movie. I think it's very good, but nothing hidden under the surface or anything. Movies that I really like that have hidden meaning, that have the esoteric imagery in it, sure. Let's see. Well, we've done Star Wars. I mean, I was born in 1971. So I grew up on the first 3 Star Wars movies. The one movie that I really liked, that has a lot of Gnostic themes in it is Fight Club, with Brad Pitt and Norton. That's a great film. That's one of my all-time favorites. And, that has some great esoteric, themes in it. One of my all-time favorite movies was, growing up was, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Spaghetti Western that has a lot of religious symbolism in
it. You mentioned that the biblical Christian Roman Catholic esoteric archetypes in those spaghetti westerns, that I find to be very fascinating because I never would have thought that watching those movies would have that. So that's great, and that's in cinema symbolism too, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I took on some Western movies. Western is one of my all-time favorite genres,
Right.
and I covered 5 movies. The 3 Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns. The movie by John Wayne called Red River. That really has a lot of the masculine archetypes in it. I mean, that really is sort of your prototypical masculine archetypal movie is Red River with John Wayne. And then I did The Magnificent Seven. This was the original one with Yul Brynner. Again, a lot of archetypal imagery in that. The spaghetti westerns of Leone, I'm a big fan of all 3 of them. The Good, the Bad is the best one, though, by far and away. And he was raised a Roman Catholic, and you'll find this. I say the movies are akin to Christian Kabbalism. You will find these very deep, esoteric, mystical Christian themes in those 3 films. He toys around with it with the first one, which is Fistful of Dollars, which is where Clint Eastwood plays, sort of the blue-eyed, golden-haired, savior Christ figure, doing battle with the 2 evil houses, the Rojas and the Baxters. This is all very much concealed beneath the surface. You have the Baxters, who are sort of the demonic, evil gangsters. They burned, the Baxters alive. They burned their house down. It's very hellfire-ish. The one woman compares the one Rojas to the devil himself. You have the devil holding Marisol captive, and of course she wants to get back to her child and husband. And of course the child's name is named Jesus. So we have Clint Eastwood, who unifies Marisol, Mary, and Jesus, the unification of Madonna and child. Investing, Clint Eastwood is sort of the savior figure. At the end, Clint Eastwood gets wounded. He goes to the subterranean crypt to heal, emerges, and now can perform miracles, blocking the bullets. So again, we have this Christ imagery. He carries this forward, Leone does, with the next one, which is for a few dollars more. I'll let people read on that one. But the one that he really gets involved with it in is Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This is where the one where he really perfects it, where you clearly have the Blondie character, Clint Eastwood again playing the Christ figure, God, the good, and of course he's doing battle with the devil, who is Lee Van Cleef, the bad, dressed in black in the entire movie. Runs the death camp where the prisoners are denigrated. Clint Eastwood, when he's actually introduced, you'll hear the angelic music playing behind him. At the end of the movie, he goes into a church where there's a dying soldier, and he comforts him by giving him the cigar. This is obviously an act of divine mercy. And of course, what's going on in the film? Well, the God and the devil character are constantly battling for the soul of the ugly. This is Eli Wallach, who is mankind. And it's ugly because it's the fall of Eden. It's the state of original sin. So you have in the entire film, God versus the devil trying to claim the soul of mankind, who is the ugly. There are some astrological archetypes going on in this as well. I want people to read the book for those. But it's a great film anyway. But yeah, overloaded with a lot of esoteric religious symbolism. I'll just wrap up on this, Mike, by saying these exact same themes that we are talking about with this were incorporated by another Roman Catholic filmmaker in a movie that he made in the early 2000s. Martin Scorsese uses these exact same techniques in a movie called The Gangs of New York.
Right, yes.
With Daniel Day-Lewis and Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's the same thing. It's a lot of religious allegory in that movie. If you like the spaghetti westerns and you like that religious symbolism, take a look at Gangs of New York. Very over with a lot of Christian symbolism.
Yeah, I watched that recently. Yeah, the 5 points, the dead rabbits, the whole thing. Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis is such a phenomenal actor too. It's a great movie. I really like that one. Yeah, I mean, wow, this stuff is so fascinating. Maybe we could talk a little bit about one of my favorite movies. I brought up the fact that I wanted to talk about either my favorite movies or your favorite movies, but one of my favorite movies of all time is Blade Runner. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
All right. No, Blade Runner. Yeah, Blade Runner is. It's funny you mentioned that. That is a very. Well, it's not funny you mentioned it. It's a great film anyway. It's a decidedly Gnostic film. Mm-hmm. You have in this. I haven't seen the new one yet. but I want to. I'm actually writing. Blade Runner was a movie that I touched on. I did it in the first movie book. I'm actually outlining Cinema Symbolism 3 right now. I'm going to do a chapter called Gnostic Cinema, and I'm going to cover some of the Gnostic movies that I haven't done in other books, such as movies like Dark City, Vanilla Sky, things like that. The Metropolis by Fritz Lang. And I'm gonna revisit. I don't want to get into it too in depth, but I definitely want to hit on some of the points with Blade Runner. I mean, you have in that the Kabbalistic golem with Roy Batty, the machine, who is a golem. This comes out of the Bible. A creature, a man-made creature invested with human characteristics. A lot of times, these creatures, the golems, are more philosophical than their human counterparts, and this, of course, is the case with Batty. Mm-hmm. You have the whole idea in this of Descartes, who may be a replicant. Also, this is something that's teased in the first one. Is going on the hunt, for these replicants, the Nexus Sixes, and it's this whole idea of the machines are deserving of life as well. They're actually invested with human souls, and you find this with Batty at the end, where they ascend the building. In the rain, think baptism. They go up the building to, climbing the mountain of Gnosis. They ascend the ladder, right. And this is, of course, where Batty, expires in front of Descartes. And it's interesting too because we don't have time to get into this. The whole name of Rick Descartes is a play on the French philosopher René Descartes.
I think, therefore, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, who wrote about emotions and the human soul and things like that.
Wow.
And discovers that Batty is, of course, invested with a soul. And then you have Batty there in the pouring rain, releases the dove. And of course, this comes out of the New Testament, where when Christ is baptized, again, think of the pouring rain. When Christ is baptized by John the Baptist, the dove ascends as an emblem of his divine soul, the Holy Spirit. And of course, when Batty, Rutger Hauer, expires there, he releases the dove. So it's his divine soul ascending to heaven, essentially. Wow. And it's the whole idea of that Descartes has now received gnosis. He's received wisdom, that the replicants are not just soulless, mindless creatures. They're invested with a soul from Tyrell. Interesting symbol with the owl being the symbol of Tyrell Corporation.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up because I was like that when you mentioned the dove, I was like, there's so many little bird images in this movie: the owl, the dove, and then there's that origami thing that they make. I don't know exactly what kind of bird, swan. Oh, unicorn, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it has to do with the unicorn symbolizes the human mind, is the pineal gland. And again, that comes out of the works of Manly P. Hall. It has to do with the mind and receiving wisdom. And the owl is, of course, another symbol of wisdom. It ties into the goddess Minerva. That was her sacred totem, was the owl. And not only are Tyrell Corporation creating life, they're creating wisdom. And this is a tip-off that that they're investing these Nexus Sixes with wisdom. So it's a great movie, and it's just loaded with you'll see this motif play out again. This exact same motif play out again in the movie called V for Vendetta, where Natalie Portman's character, it's the same thing. She ascends the building in the pouring rain to be baptized, to join V's nihilistic mission against Norse Fire England. She receives epiphany. She receives wisdom. She receives awakening. Dorothy Gale in Wizard of Oz, receives the same thing. There's no place like home. It's her Gnostic epiphany. And we have the same theme going on inside of Blade Runner. So yeah, it's a great movie. I talk about it in the first cinema book, and it's something I'm going to probably revisit a little bit in the third cinema book. It's a great film. It's one of my all-time favorites also. And, absolutely, overloaded with esoteric imagery.
Well, that's fantastic, Robert. And thank you so much for diving into all these things. I feel like we went all over the place here. It was really great conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. And I'm so thrilled to be entering into this new world of information and picking apart all this stuff. And I can't wait to actually dive into the Royal Arch of Enoch, the Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism. That's my next book. That's my mission right there. And I recommend everybody go and get these books and get your own gnosis, right? Get your gnosis on, as the kids are saying these days. And and you can, and people can get all your books to dive further into these topics, cinema symbolism and cinema symbolism too. Where can people go and find you and find your books, and maybe you can give them your website and social media stuff?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you, Mike, for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. I thought the show was tremendous, and I really appreciate it. And anytime you want to have me back on, I'd love to come back on.
Excellent.
We can do it all over again. We talk about new movies and Freemasonry and anything you want to. I'm working on some more books, so would most welcome a chance to come back on. If you're interested in me and you want to find out more about me and my books, the easiest way is just go to my website, which is my name. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. My website is my name. It's www.robertwsullivan and the letter I, the letter V for the fourth.com, robertwsullivan.iv.com. It's from there you can purchase the books. They're available on all the main online retailers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, of course, Books A Million. You can get the print edition. You can get the ebook, whatever fits you. That's no problem. There's information there about me, my biography, my social media. You can follow me on Twitter. I have a YouTube channel where I have loads of radio shows archived. That's all completely that content is free. You can listen to that anytime. I have update events and appearance page, Medium Press, where this show will go when it's eventually posted. This is constantly being updated with shows I'm have been on or are going to be on. So just go to my website. It's very easy to navigate. Again, you can follow me on social media from there, and buy the books, of course. Loads of links to purchase the books, ebook or print edition. www.robertwsullivan.iv.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you all for listening. Until next time, take care. Peace. I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. You know what to do if you love this show. Share it, like it, spread it with your friends. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/MikeBrank. You can donate as little as $1 a month. Or you could go on iTunes and leave me a nice 5-star rating and review. Whatever you do, thank you for listening. Much love to you all. Peace.